The preacher's daughter knew trouble the moment she saw the drifter ride into Red Bluff, Texas, on that scorching August afternoon in 1876. His weathered leather duster covered in trail dust, and his dark eyes reflecting a kind of loneliness that matched her own. Clara Preston stood on the wooden steps of her father's modest church, a simple white structure that had served the community for nearly 15 years. She held a basket of fresh linens she had just laundered in the creek, and the wind caught a few strands of her honey-colored hair, pulling them free from the careful bun she had arranged that morning. At 22, she had grown accustomed to the quiet life Red Bluff offered, even if sometimes it felt like her world was no bigger than the church walls and the small room she occupied behind the pulpit. The rider moved slowly down the dirt road, his horse looking as tired as he probably felt. Clara noticed the way he sat in the saddle with an easy confidence, the kind that came from years of riding rather than any attempt to impress. His dark hair needed a trim, and stubble shadowed his jaw. When he glanced her way, she felt her breath catch unexpectedly. She should have looked away. A proper preacher's daughter would have hurried inside, would have avoided any appearance of impropriety. Instead, Clara found herself rooted to the spot, watching as he guided his horse toward the general store across the dusty street. Her father emerged from the church behind her, his heavy footsteps recognizable even before he spoke. Reverend Thomas Preston was a man of stern convictions and deep faith, his gray hair always neatly combed, his black coat always pressed despite the Texas heat. "Clara, those linens will not fold themselves," he said, his voice carrying the mild reproach she had grown up hearing. "And we have evening services to prepare for." "Yes, Papa," she replied automatically, forcing herself to turn away from the stranger and follow her father inside. But the image of the drifter stayed with her, burned into her mind like a brand. Inside the church, she busied herself with preparations while her father reviewed his sermon notes. The building smelled of old wood and candle wax, familiar scents that usually brought her comfort. Today, though, she felt restless, her thoughts wandering to the man on horseback and wondering what had brought him to their small town. Red Bluff sat in the middle of nowhere, really, just a collection of buildings serving the ranches and farms scattered across the surrounding prairie. Most strangers passed through on their way to somewhere more important. Few stayed longer than a night or two. Evening came, and with it, the small congregation that attended services 3 times a week. Clara sat in her usual spot in the front pew, her worn Bible open in her lap, trying to focus on her father's words about redemption and righteousness. But her mind kept drifting to questions about the stranger. Where had he come from? Where was he going? What sort of life had carved those lines around his eyes? After the service ended and the last parishioner had filed out, Clara helped her father extinguish the candles. They ate a simple supper of bread and stew, speaking little, as was their habit. Her mother had died of fever when Clara was only 7, and in the 15 years since, she and her father had developed a quiet, careful existence together. "I will be visiting the Johnson family tomorrow," her father announced as they cleaned the dishes. "Martha Johnson is still quite ill. I expect you to tend to the church in my absence." "Of course, Papa," Clara said, scrubbing a pot with more vigor than necessary. She was always left to tend to the church, to sweep and clean and prepare while her father made his pastoral visits. Not that she minded the work exactly, but sometimes she wondered if there might be more to life than these same walls, these same routines. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Clara stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of Red Bluff settling into darkness. Somewhere in town, the stranger was likely bedding down as well. She wondered if he was staying at the boarding house or if he had simply made camp somewhere outside town. She wondered if he was alone by choice or circumstance. She told herself it did not matter. He would be gone soon, moving on to wherever drifters went, and her life would continue exactly as it had before. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it filled her with an unexpected sadness that kept her awake long into the night. The next morning dawned clear and already warm. Clara rose early, as always, and dressed in one of her simple calico dresses, this one a faded blue that had once been brighter. She braided her hair and pinned it up, then set about making breakfast for her father. Reverend Preston left shortly after eating, his Bible tucked under his arm, his hat firmly in place. Clara watched him walk down the road toward the Johnson farm, then turned her attention to the church. She swept the floors, dusted the pews, and arranged fresh wildflowers on the simple altar. By mid-morning, the sun was beating down hard, and she decided to take a break, fetching water from the well behind the church. She was drawing up the bucket when she heard the creak of the gate. Turning, she found herself face to face with the stranger. Up close, he was taller than she had realized and younger too. Maybe 25 or 26, though his sun-weathered face made it hard to tell. He had removed his hat, holding it respectfully in his hands, and his dark hair was slightly damp, as if he had recently dunked his head in a water trough. "Morning, miss," he said, his voice low and pleasant, with a slight drawl that suggested he hailed from somewhere further south. "I hope I am not intruding. The lady at the general store said this was the church, and I was hoping to water my horse if that would be acceptable." Clara realized she had been staring and quickly composed herself. "Of course. The well serves everyone in town." She stepped aside, suddenly very aware of the fraying hem of her dress and the plain simplicity of her appearance. "Much obliged," he said, and there was something genuine in his tone that put her slightly at ease. He led his horse through the gate, a sturdy roan that looked better rested than it had the day before. As he worked the well handle, drawing up fresh water for the animal, Clara found herself unable to walk away as propriety demanded. "Are you passing through?" she asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was none of her business, but he did not seem to mind. "I suppose that depends," he said, watching his horse drink. "I have been drifting for a while now, looking for a place that might feel right to settle down. Getting tired of sleeping under stars and eating dust." "Red Bluff is not much of a town," Clara said honestly. "Most people find it too quiet." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "Quiet sounds pretty good to me right about now," he said. "I have had enough excitement to last a lifetime." There was a story there, Clara could tell. She wanted to ask, wanted to know everything about this man who had ridden into her monotonous world and somehow made it feel different just by existing in it. But before she could formulate a question that would not sound too forward, he spoke again. "Zachary Olson," he said, extending his hand. "Most folks call me Zach." She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but gentle. "Clara Preston, my father is the Reverend here." Something shifted in his expression, a wariness entering his eyes. "I see. Well, Miss Preston, I appreciate the water. I will be on my way and let you get back to your work." He was leaving, preparing to mount his horse, and Clara felt a sudden desperate need to keep him there just a little longer. "Are you looking for work?" she blurted out. "There are several ranches around here that might be hiring hands." Zach paused, one foot in the stirrup. "I might be. You know of any in particular?" "The Morrow Ranch, about 5 miles north of town. Mr. Morrow mentioned last Sunday that he could use help with his cattle before the fall drive." Clara had no idea why she was being so helpful, why she cared whether this stranger stayed or left. "That is kind of you to mention," Zach said, settling back onto the ground. 5 miles north, you said? Yes, just follow the main road, you cannot miss it. They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to end the conversation but neither knowing what else to say. Finally, Zach cleared his throat. "Your father, does he mind strangers attending services?" "Everyone is welcome in the house of God," Clara replied, echoing her father's frequent pronouncement, though she suspected the Reverend might feel differently if he knew she had been speaking so freely with a drifter. "Then maybe I will see you Sunday, Miss Preston, if I am still in the area." He mounted his horse then, settling into the saddle with that same easy grace she had noticed before. Clara watched him ride away, her heart beating faster than it should, her mind already counting the days until Sunday. The rest of the day passed slowly. Clara finished her chores, started preparing the evening meal, and tried not to think about dark eyes and calloused hands. When her father returned that evening, tired but satisfied with his visit to the Johnsons, Clara served supper and listened to him talk about Martha's improving condition and the family's continued faithfulness despite hardship. "There was a stranger at the church today," she mentioned, trying to sound casual. "He watered his horse at the well." Her father's eyes sharpened. "What manner of stranger? A cowboy?" "He said he was looking for work. I told him Mr. Morrow might be hiring. You spoke with him?" Her father's tone carried disapproval. "Clara, you know better than to engage with drifters. Such men are often running from something and they bring trouble with them." "He seemed polite enough," Clara said quietly, looking down at her plate. "He asked about attending services." Reverend Preston was quiet for a long moment. "Well, if he comes, we will welcome him as we would anyone, but I expect you to keep your distance, daughter. A man who wanders has no roots, no stability. He is not the sort you should concern yourself with." Clara nodded obediently, but inside, something rebellious stirred. Her entire life had been about distance and propriety and doing what was expected. For once, she wanted something different, even if she was not entirely sure what that something was. The next few days crawled by. Clara went about her usual routines, but everything felt different now, touched by a restless energy she could not quite shake. She caught herself looking down the road more often than necessary, watching for a particular horse and rider that did not appear. Saturday evening, as she prepared her dress for Sunday service, she took extra care with the mending, fixing a small tear in the sleeve and pressing the fabric smooth. She told herself it was simply proper to look presentable in church, but she knew she was lying. Sunday morning arrived sunny and warm. Clara woke early, her stomach fluttering with anticipation and nerves. She dressed carefully, pinning her hair with special attention, even using a bit of rose water she had been saving. At breakfast, her father gave her an odd look but said nothing. The church filled slowly as noon approached. Red Bluff's congregation was never large, perhaps 30 souls on a good day, consisting mostly of ranching families and townspeople. Clara took her seat in the front pew and tried not to crane her neck looking for Zach. Her father began the service, his voice strong as he led the opening hymn. Clara stood with everyone else, her hymnal open, singing words she had known by heart since childhood. She was halfway through the second verse when she heard the door creak open. She did not turn around, but she felt it somehow, a shift in the air that told her Zach had come. The knowledge made her voice waver slightly, and she had to concentrate hard to keep singing. The service seemed to last forever and no time at all. Her father preached about the prodigal son, about redemption and forgiveness and coming home. Clara wondered if Zach was listening, if the words meant anything to him, if he had something in his past that needed forgiving. When the final hymn ended and her father gave the benediction, Clara remained seated while the congregation filed out. She usually stood by her father's side, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. But today she felt frozen in place, afraid that if she turned around, Zach would not actually be there, and this would all have been her imagination. But then his shadow fell across her pew, and she looked up to find him standing there, hat in hand, wearing a clean shirt and looking slightly uncomfortable in the churchy setting. "Miss Preston," he said quietly, "that was a fine service. Mr. Olson." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "You are still in Red Bluff, then?" "Got the job at the Morrow Ranch," he said, and she thought she detected a note of pleasure in his voice. "Turns out they needed someone who knows cattle, and I have been working ranches since I was 14. "That is good news," Clara said, meaning it. "So you will be staying, for a while anyway. Long enough to earn some money, maybe figure out my next move." He shifted his weight, glancing toward where her father was speaking with a parishioner near the door. "I was wondering, Miss Preston, if you might be free sometime this week. I know it is forward of me, but I am new to town and would appreciate some friendly conversation. Maybe you could tell me more about Red Bluff, help me get my bearings." Clara's heart hammered. She knew what her father would say if she asked permission. She knew what the town gossips would say if they saw her walking with a cowboy she barely knew. But she also knew, with sudden clarity, that she was tired of living her entire life according to everyone else's rules. "Wednesday afternoon," she heard herself say. "I usually walk to the creek to do washing. If you happen to be riding that way around 2 o'clock, we might encounter each other." Zach's face broke into a smile, the first real one she had seen from him, and it transformed his features, making him look younger and less guarded. "I appreciate the information, Miss Preston. I will keep that in mind." He tipped his hat and moved toward the door, stopping to shake her father's hand and thank him for the sermon. Clara watched the exchange, saw her father's careful politeness, and knew she was playing with fire. She did not care. Wednesday took its time arriving, but finally, the day came. Clara packed her washing basket, told her father she would be at the creek, and set off with her pulse racing. The walk took about 20 minutes, following a well-worn path through scrub brush and mesquite trees. The creek was not much, especially in late summer, but it ran clear and cold from a spring somewhere upstream, and it was the best place for washing. Clara reached the water's edge and was setting out her things when she heard hoofbeats. She turned to see Zach riding toward her, and the smile on his face told her he was just as pleased by this meeting as she was. He dismounted and led his horse to drink. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, his eyes twinkling with humor. "Indeed," Clara replied, unable to suppress her own smile. "What brings you to the creek, Mr. Olson? Please call me Zach. And I thought my horse might appreciate fresh water. Also, I heard the view was nice out here." He was looking directly at her as he said it, and Clara felt her cheeks warm. "You should not say such things," she said, but without much conviction. "Probably not," he agreed, "but I find myself wanting to anyway." He sat down on a large rock near the water's edge while Clara began her washing, and they fell into easy conversation. He told her about growing up in Louisiana, the son of a farmer who had lost everything in the war. He told her about drifting west after his parents died, working various ranches, learning the land and the cattle trade. "Never stayed anywhere long," he admitted. "Always felt like I was looking for something, though I could not tell you what. Figured I would know it when I found it." Clara wrung out a shirt and draped it over a bush to dry. "And have you found it?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the water flow past. "Maybe. Still figuring that out." She told him about her own life, though there was less to tell. Red Bluff was all she had ever known. Her mother's death had shaped her childhood, turning her into her father's helper and companion. She had learned to cook and clean and organize, to recite scripture and lead children's lessons, to be everything a preacher's daughter should be. "But what do you want?" Zach asked. "Not what your father wants, not what the town expects. What does Clara want?" No one had ever asked her that before. Clara sat back on her heels, truly considering the question. "I want more," she said finally. "More than these same walls, these same days. I want to see what is beyond Red Bluff. I want to know what it feels like to make my own choices. I want—" She trailed off, suddenly afraid she had said too much. "You want to live," Zach finished quietly. "I understand that." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits. Clara felt it settle into her chest, warm and certain. Over the next few weeks, they found ways to meet. Always carefully, always with some practical excuse. Zach would come to town for supplies and happen to stop by the church. Clara would take walks that coincidentally crossed paths with his rides back from the Morrow Ranch. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams. Clara discovered that Zach was thoughtful and kind, that he read when he could get books, that he had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh. He was honest about his past mistakes, about the years he had spent angry at God and the world after losing his family, about slowly finding his way back to something like peace. Zach learned that Clara was far more than the quiet preacher's daughter she appeared to be. She was intelligent and curious, with opinions she rarely got to express. She noticed everything about people and the world around her. She had dreams she had almost forgotten to dream. They were falling in love, though neither said it aloud. Clara had never felt anything like this before, this constant awareness of another person, this desire to be near him, to hear his voice, to see him smile. It terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure, but keeping secrets in a small town was nearly impossible. By October, people were starting to notice. Clara caught the knowing looks from women at the general store, heard the whispers that stopped when she approached. Her father, absorbed in his pastoral duties, seemed oblivious, but Clara knew it was only a matter of time before someone mentioned something to him. The confrontation came on a cool evening in late October. Clara was preparing supper when her father entered the kitchen, his face set in stern lines. "Clara, I have heard disturbing reports that you have been spending time with that cowboy, Zachary Olson." She kept her hands steady as she sliced bread. "We have spoken on occasion, yes. On occasion. Mrs. Henderson saw you walking with him near the creek last week. Mr. Taylor mentioned seeing you together behind the church. Clara, this is unacceptable. I told you to keep your distance from that man." "Why?" The word came out sharper than she intended. "What has he done wrong? He attends church faithfully, he works hard, he has been nothing but respectful." "He is a drifter," her father said firmly. "A man without roots or family or prospects beyond whatever ranch will hire him next. You are my daughter. You deserve better than a cowboy who will likely move on as soon as the whim strikes him." "Perhaps I should decide what I deserve," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly. "Perhaps I am old enough to make my own choices about who I spend time with." Her father's face reddened. "As long as you live under my roof and eat my food, you will respect my authority. I forbid you from seeing this man again. Is that understood?" Clara set down the knife, her hands trembling now with anger and frustration. "Yes, Papa, I understand." But understanding and obeying were two different things. That night, Clara lay awake, her mind churning. She was 22 years old, a grown woman, and yet she was still treated like a child. She had spent her entire life being obedient, being proper, being what everyone expected. And what had it gotten her? A small room behind a church and a future that looked exactly like her past. The next morning, she rose early and slipped out of the church before her father woke. She walked to the Morrow Ranch, her heart pounding, knowing this was reckless but unable to stop herself. She found Zach in the stable, brushing down his horse. When he saw her, his face lit up before concern took over. "Clara, what are you doing here if your father finds out?" "He already knows," she said. "About us meeting, someone told him. He forbade me from seeing you again." Zach's expression darkened. "I see. Well, I would never want to cause trouble between you and your father. If you think it is best we stop." "No." Clara moved closer, looking up at him with all the certainty she felt. "Zach, I do not want to stop. I am tired of doing what everyone else thinks is best. For the first time in my life, I want something for myself. I want you." He stared at her, something fierce and hopeful rising in his eyes. "Clara, you need to be sure. Because if you are saying what I think you are saying, there is no going back. Your father will never forgive this. The town will talk. Your whole life here will change." "I know," she said. "I am sure." Zach reached for her then, his hands cupping her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "I love you," he said, the words rough with emotion. "I have probably loved you since that first day I saw you on those church steps. But I need you to know what you would be choosing. I do not have much. I have been saving my wages, but it is not a lot. I have a piece of land about 10 miles from here. 40 acres I bought cheap because it is rough country. I was planning to build on it eventually, start my own place. But it would be hard work, Clara, harder than anything you have known." "I am not afraid of hard work," she said. "I am only afraid of living a life without you in it." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Clara felt like she was finally, truly awake after years of sleepwalking through her days. They made plans quickly, knowing they had to move fast before her father could interfere. Zach would go into town and speak to the justice of the peace, arrange for a marriage license. They would marry quietly, then move to his land and begin building their life together. Clara knew she should feel guilty. She should feel terrible about defying her father, about abandoning the church that had been her whole world. But all she felt was a bubbling excitement, a sense that she was finally stepping into the life she was meant to live. 3 days later, on a sunny November morning, Clara married Zachary Olson in the Justice of the Peace's office with only the man's wife and the local doctor as witnesses. She wore her best dress, and Zach had bought a new shirt for the occasion. When he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. They rode to Zach's land that afternoon, Clara seated in front of him on his horse, her few possessions tied in a bundle behind the saddle. She had left a letter for her father, trying to explain, trying to make him understand, though she doubted he ever would. The thought brought her sadness, but not regret. The land Zach had bought was indeed rough, 40 acres of rolling prairie dotted with mesquite and scrub oak. A small creek ran through one corner, guaranteeing water year-round. There was no house, only a crude-lined shack that Zach had been using for shelter. "I know it does not look like much," Zach said, helping her down from the horse, "but I have been planning, making designs. I want to build us a proper house, Clara, something sturdy that will last." Clara looked around at the wide sky, the open land, the possibilities stretching in every direction. "I think it is beautiful," she said honestly. "It is ours. That makes it perfect." They spent their first night as husband and wife in the little lined shack, crowded but happy, talking late into the night about their plans. Zach showed her the sketches he had made for a house, explaining where each room would go, how he would orient it to catch the breeze in summer and the sun in winter. "And here," he said, pointing to a spot on the drawing, "I thought we might add on a room later when we need it. For children, maybe." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "I would like that. But Zach, there is something else I want even more." "What is that? A chapel," she said softly. "I know my father and I did not part well, and I know I am probably not welcome in his church anymore. But my faith is still important to me. I would like a place to worship, to pray. It does not have to be large or fancy, just somewhere sacred." Zach was quiet for a moment, and Clara worried she had asked too much. But then he pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Then I will build you a chapel," he said. "Right here on our land. You will never have to go back to Red Bluff to worship if you do not want to. You would do that for me, Clara. I would do anything for you. Do you not know that by now?" She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into it, and they fell asleep tangled together, already planning the life they would build. The next weeks were a flurry of activity. Zach continued working at the Morrow Ranch to earn money for materials, while Clara began making the line shack more livable. She cleaned and organized, planted a small garden, learned to cook over an open fire when the tiny stove proved insufficient. It was harder than she had anticipated. Her hands, unused to such rough work, developed blisters that turned to calluses. Her back ached from hauling water and scrubbing floors. The isolation sometimes pressed on her, miles from town with only Zach for company most days. But she had never been happier. When Zach came home each evening, tired and dusty from his work, his face would light up at seeing her. They would share simple meals and talk about their day, about their dreams, about the home they were creating together. He was teaching her to ride properly, and she was teaching him the finer points of cooking and keeping house. November gave way to December, and with the cooler weather, Zach began working on weekends to clear land for building. He enlisted the help of some of the ranch hands he had befriended, and together they started hauling stones for the foundation. Clara asked what they were building first, the house or the chapel, and Zach had smiled. "The chapel," he said. "I made you a promise and I aim to keep it." The chapel took shape slowly over the winter months. It was small, no bigger than a single room, but Zach built it with care and attention to detail. He used native stone for the foundation and walls, hauling each piece himself. The roof was simple wood planks, but he carved a small cross for the peak, sanding it smooth with his own hands. Clara helped when she could, mixing mortar, holding boards steady while he nailed them in place. She sewed curtains for the 2 small windows, simple white fabric she had bought in town during one of their rare visits. She polished a small table they would use as an altar, arranging it with candles and her mother's Bible, one of the few possessions she had brought from her father's house. As spring approached, the chapel neared completion. Zach installed a simple wooden door, hung it carefully, and stepped back to admire their work. "What do you think?" he asked Clara, who stood beside him with tears in her eyes. "I think it is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she said truthfully. It was plain and simple, nothing like the grand churches in bigger cities, but it was built with love, and that made it sacred. They held their first service there on Easter Sunday, just the 2 of them. Clara read from Scripture, and they sang hymns together, their voices rising in the small space. Afterward, Zach held her hand and prayed aloud, thanking God for bringing them together, for this land, for the chance to build something meaningful. "And please," he added, "help heal the breach between Clara and her father. Soften his heart toward her even if he cannot accept me. She misses him, even if she does not say it." Clara squeezed his hand, grateful for his understanding. She did miss her father, missed him terribly some days. But she could not regret her choice. Loving Zach was not a mistake, no matter what anyone else thought. With the chapel complete, they turned their attention to the house. This was a bigger undertaking, requiring more materials and more help. Zach had been saving every penny he could, and Clara had started taking in sewing work from some of the ranch families. earning small amounts to add to their building fund. By early summer, they had enough to begin. The house would be modest, just 3 rooms initially, with the possibility of adding on later. Zach designed it to face east, catching the morning sun, with a porch wide enough for sitting on warm evenings. The building went faster with the chapel experience behind them. Several men from the Morrow Ranch volunteered their time, and Clara cooked for the work crews, her skills improving with practice. She made stews and bread, pies and roasts, feeding hungry men who repaid her with labor and friendship. One of the men, an older cowboy named Pete, pulled Zach aside one evening. "You have got yourself a good woman there," he said, nodding toward where Clara was cleaning up after the meal. "Not many would take to this life the way she has. You make sure you treat her right." "I plan to," Zach replied. "She is the best thing that ever happened to me." The house was finished by late July, a simple but sturdy structure with real glass windows and a good stove that Zach had bought from a family leaving Texas. Clara cried when she saw the kitchen, larger than the one she had grown up with shelves Zach had built specifically for her dishes and supplies. "This is home," she said, turning to him. "Finally, really home." They moved their belongings from the line shack, which they would keep for storage and possible future use. Clara arranged their few pieces of furniture, hung curtains, made the place as comfortable as she could with what they had. It was not much by most standards, but it was theirs, earned through hard work and built with love. That night, lying in their new bedroom, listening to the sounds of the prairie through the open window, Clara felt a peace she had never known before. "Are you happy?" she asked Zach, who was already half asleep beside her. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he mumbled, pulling her closer. "You?" "Beyond measure," she whispered. August brought news that shook their peaceful existence. A rider from town brought word that Reverend Preston had taken ill. Not seriously, the messenger assured them, but he was weak and asking for Clara. Clara stood on their new porch, the message in her hand, torn between conflicting emotions. She wanted to see her father, to make peace if possible. But she was also afraid he would reject her again, afraid the visit would undo all the healing she had done. Zach came up behind her, reading the situation without needing to ask. "Go to him," he said gently. "You will regret it if you do not. I will drive you in the wagon." The next morning, they made the trip to Red Bluff. Clara had not been back since her marriage, and seeing the familiar buildings stirred up complicated feelings. People stared as they passed, some with curiosity, some with judgment. Clara held her head high, Zach's presence beside her giving her strength. At the church, she hesitated before going in. "Do you want me to come with you?" Zach asked. "No," Clara decided. "This is something I need to do alone, but wait for me, always," he promised. Her father was in his room, looking older and frailer than Clara remembered. When she entered, his eyes widened, and for a moment she saw pure joy in his face before he remembered to be stern. "Clara," he said, his voice weaker than usual. "You came." "Of course I came, Papa. You are my father." She sat beside his bed, taking in the sparse room that had been his world for so long. "I have been praying," he said after a long silence. "Praying for guidance, for understanding. I have been so angry with you, child, so disappointed." The words stung, but Clara kept her composure. "I know, Papa. I am sorry I hurt you, but I cannot be sorry for marrying Zach. I love him. He is a good man, whether you choose to see it or not." Her father was quiet for a long moment. "Martha Johnson spoke to me," he said finally. "Told me I was a fool, letting pride keep me from my only daughter. She said you had found real love, the kind that does not come along often, and that I should be grateful instead of judgmental." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Mrs. Johnson said that." She did. along with several other congregation members who apparently have more wisdom than I do." He sighed heavily. "Clara, I have spent my life preaching about forgiveness, about grace, about God's love. But when it came to my own daughter making a choice I did not approve of, I forgot all those lessons." "Papa, let me finish," he said, raising a weak hand. "I was wrong. Not about my concerns, perhaps. This life you have chosen will be hard. But I was wrong to judge your husband before knowing him, wrong to cut you off, wrong to let my pride matter more than my love for you." He paused, tears running down his weathered cheeks. "Can you forgive a stubborn old man?" Clara was crying now too, reaching for her father's hand. "Of course, Papa. Of course I forgive you." They talked for hours, Clara telling him about the land, the house, the beautiful chapel Zach had built for her. Her father listened, asking questions, slowly letting go of his resentment. He was still weak, but the illness seemed less important than this healing between them. Finally, as afternoon shadows grew long, her father asked, "Is he here?" "Your husband?" "Yes, he drove me from the ranch. He is waiting outside." "Send him in," her father said. "I should like to meet the man who built my daughter a chapel." Clara found Zach sitting on the church steps, exactly where she had been standing the day they first saw each other. "He wants to meet you," she said, hardly daring to believe it. Zach stood, squaring his shoulders. "Then I had better not keep him waiting." Clara watched, her heart in her throat, as the two most important men in her life faced each other. Her father extended his hand from the bed, and Zach took it carefully. "Mr. Olson," her father said, "my daughter tells me you built her a chapel on your land." "Yes, sir. It seemed important to her, so it became important to me." Her father studied him for a long moment. "Clara also tells me you work hard, you treat her well, and you make her happy." "I try, sir. She deserves nothing less." "No, she does not." Her father's grip tightened slightly. "I am trusting you with my most precious treasure, Mr. Olson. Do not make me regret softening my heart toward this union. I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of her, sir. You have my word." Reverend Preston nodded slowly, then looked past Zach to Clara. "Bring him to Sunday dinner," he said. "I should like to know more about this ranch you are building, about your plans for the future." Clara felt joy burst through her chest. "We will, Papa, thank you." The ride back to the ranch was quiet but comfortable. Clara leaned against Zach's shoulder as he drove, watching the sun set over the prairie they now called home. "Your father is a good man," Zach said eventually. "Stubborn but good. I can see where you get your strength from." "He is," Clara agreed, "and he will come around completely given time. He just needed to see that we were serious, that this was not some passing fancy." "Clara, there is nothing passing about the way I feel about you," Zach said, glancing down at her. "You are my home, my heart, my future. Every day I wake up grateful that you chose this life with me." "Every day I wake up knowing I made the right choice," she replied. True to his word, Reverend Preston improved in health over the following weeks, and Clara and Zach began visiting Red Bluff regularly for Sunday dinners. The town slowly adjusted to seeing them together, and while some still whispered, most came to accept that the preacher's daughter had found happiness in an unexpected place. Clara's father visited their ranch one Sunday in September, riding out with them after church services. Clara watched nervously as he surveyed their land, their house, the chapel Zach had built. He walked slowly around the small structure, examining it carefully. "You did good work here," he said finally to Zach. "Solid construction, and this cross you carved is beautiful." "Thank you, sir. I wanted it to be worthy of worship." Reverend Preston turned to face them both. "I have been thinking," he said carefully. "My health is not what it was, and Red Bluff is growing. We could use another place of worship, especially for those living outside town. Would you consider opening this chapel to others? Perhaps holding occasional services here. Clara looked at Zach, who nodded. We would be honored, Papa, she said. That is what it was built for, after all, to bring people closer to God. And so, once a month, neighbors and nearby ranching families began gathering at the little chapel on the Olson land for services. Sometimes Reverend Preston came to preach, but more often, Clara or Zach led simple worship, reading scripture and singing hymns. It was nothing fancy, but it was heartfelt, and people seemed to appreciate having a place to gather. The ranch itself was prospering. Zach had quit working for the Morrows and was now focused solely on building their own cattle operation. He had bought a small herd, and Clara learned to help with the work, becoming skilled at riding and even handling a rope when necessary. Together, they branded calves, mended fences, and planned for expansion. By the time their first anniversary approached, Clara had news to share. She told Zach one evening in November as they sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. I am with child, she said simply, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Come spring, you are going to be a father. Zach's face went through a series of expressions, shock, joy, wonder, before settling on something like awe. A baby, truly, truly. Are you happy? He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. Happy does not begin to cover it. Clara, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I never dreamed I could have this much. Neither did I, she whispered. But I am so glad we found each other. The pregnancy was not always easy. Clara experienced sickness in the early months, and the winter was long and cold. But Zach was attentive and caring, taking on extra work to let her rest, bringing her tea and sitting with her when she felt unwell. Her father visited more frequently, his initial concern about the pregnancy gradually transforming into excited anticipation of becoming a grandfather. He brought supplies, advice, and eventually a beautiful cradle he had commissioned from the town carpenter. For my grandchild, he said gruffly, setting it in the corner of their bedroom. Every baby deserves a proper place to sleep. Spring arrived, and with it, the baby. Clara labored through a long day and night, attended by a midwife from town and her anxious father. Zach paced outside, praying and worrying until finally, as dawn broke, he heard the sound he had been waiting for, a baby's cry. The midwife emerged, smiling. You have a son, Mr. Olson, a healthy boy, and your wife did beautifully. Zach rushed inside to find Clara exhausted but glowing, cradling a small bundle wrapped in blankets. Come meet your son, she said softly. He approached carefully, looking down at the tiny face, the small fists, the perfect features. He is beautiful, Zach breathed. You are amazing, both of you. They named him Thomas, after Clara's father, who cried openly when they told him. Little Thomas was baptized in the chapel Zach had built, surrounded by family and friends who had become part of their community. The years that followed were full of hard work and simple joys. The ranch continued to grow, and Clara and Zach added another room to the house as their family expanded. 2 years after Thomas, they welcomed a daughter they named Rose, and 3 years after that, another son they called Benjamin. The chapel became a gathering place for the scattered community, a center of faith and fellowship. Clara often looked at it and remembered that first conversation with Zach, when she had asked for something sacred and he had promised to build it for her. That promise, kept so faithfully, had been the foundation of everything that followed. Her relationship with her father deepened over the years. Reverend Preston spent increasing amounts of time at their ranch, playing with his grandchildren, helping with services at the chapel, and slowly letting go of his rigid views about what made a proper life. He came to see that Clara had not abandoned her faith by marrying Zach. If anything, she had strengthened it, finding God in the wide prairie sky and the work of building a life from nothing. One evening when Thomas was 7, Rose was 5, and Benjamin was 2, Clara and Zach sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. The house had been expanded twice now, and there were plans for a proper barn come next year. The cattle business was thriving, and they had hired 2 steady hands to help with the work. "You ever regret it?" Zach asked quietly. "Leaving your father's church, the security you had there, for this uncertain life?" Clara looked at him, at the man who had ridden into her life 10 years ago and changed everything. His face was more weathered now, marked by sun and wind and hard work, but his eyes still held that same warmth, that same love that had captured her heart. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "Zach, you gave me everything I did not even know I needed. A home, a family, freedom to be myself. And that chapel, that beautiful chapel you built because it mattered to me. How could I regret any of it? I just want to make sure you are happy," he said. "That this is enough." "More than enough," Clara assured him. "This is more than I ever dreamed possible." As if to prove her point, Thomas came running up to the porch, his face dirty and his hair wild. "Papa, can you teach me to rope like you promised? Please?" Zach laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "Tomorrow, buddy, it is almost bedtime now." Rose appeared next, carrying her baby brother who was nearly too heavy for her but insisted she could manage. "Mama, can we have a story before bed? The one about when you and Papa got married." "Again?" Clara asked, smiling. "You have heard that story 100 times." "But it is the best one," Rose insisted. So later, with all 3 children bathed and tucked into their beds, Clara told the story once more. About the drifter who came to Red Bluff looking for a place to rest, and the preacher's daughter who was longing for something more. About how they found each other and built a life together, starting with a small chapel on empty land. "And they lived happily ever after?" Benjamin asked sleepily, even though he knew the answer. "They did," Clara confirmed, kissing his forehead. "Very happily ever after." After the children were asleep, she returned to the porch where Zach waited. He pulled her into his arms and they stood together, looking out at the land they had built a life on. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked. "About that first day I saw you," Zach said. "Standing on those church steps, looking like you were waiting for something. I almost rode on past Red Bluff, you know. Almost decided it was too small a town to bother with, but something made me stop." "Fate," Clara suggested, "or Providence, or maybe just dumb luck. Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every day." He tightened his arms around her. "Building you that chapel was supposed to be a gift, Clara, but I think you gave me so much more. You gave me a reason to stop drifting, to put down roots. You made me want to be better, to build something that would last." "We built it together," Clara corrected. "Everything we have, we made as a team." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. In the distance, they could just see the outline of the chapel, solid and enduring against the darkening sky. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new blessings. There were hard times, certainly. A drought one year that tested their resources and their faith. An injury that laid Zach up for weeks, and had Clara running the ranch with help from their hired hands and neighbors. The inevitable struggles of raising children, guiding them through childhood mishaps and teenage rebellions. But through it all, the chapel stood as a reminder of what they had built together. It was expanded once when the congregation outgrew the original single room, and Zach added benches he carved himself, each one sanded smooth and sturdy. Clara's father, growing older now but still strong in spirit, continued to visit regularly, presiding over baptisms and weddings, watching his grandchildren grow. Thomas grew into a serious young man, passionate about ranching and determined to expand the family business. Rose developed her mother's faith and her grandfather's calling, eventually feeling drawn to missionary work. Benjamin, the youngest, had his father's wanderlust but channeled it differently, becoming a surveyor who helped map the growing settlements across Texas. When Thomas was 19, he brought home a young woman named Sarah whom he had met in town. Clara watched them together and recognized the same kind of love she had found with Zach, the kind that was worth any sacrifice. They married in the chapel, of course, and eventually built their own house on a section of the Olson land, starting the next generation. Rose, at 21, announced her intention to join a mission organization working with frontier communities. Reverend Preston, now in his 70s, blessed her decision with tears in his eyes, proud that his legacy of faith continued through his granddaughter. Benjamin, always the adventurer, traveled extensively but always returned to the ranch, to the chapel, to the family that anchored him no matter how far he roamed. Clara's father passed peacefully one winter night when Clara was 48, surrounded by his family in the ranch house that had become more home to him than the church in Red Bluff ever was. His last words were of gratitude for his daughter, for the life she had built, for the son-in-law who had proven him so wonderfully wrong. They buried him in a small cemetery near the chapel, marked by a simple stone that bore his name and a line from his favorite scripture. Clara grieved but also celebrated, knowing he had lived to see his grandchildren grown and happy, knowing he had made peace with her choices and found joy in the unexpected path her life had taken. Zach, standing beside her at the grave, held her hand tightly. They were both graying now, their faces lined with age and work, but their love had only deepened over the years. He was still her anchor, her partner, her greatest blessing. As the years moved toward a new century, Clara and Zach gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, leaving it in Thomas and Sarah's capable hands. They spent their days tending a large garden, welcoming grandchildren who were beginning to arrive, and maintaining the chapel that had always been the heart of their community. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration at the ranch. There was food and music, laughter and storytelling, as 3 generations came together to honor the couple who had started it all. Standing in the chapel that evening, looking at all the faces of people she loved, Clara felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about that restless girl she had been, standing on church steps and longing for something more. She had found it, found everything and more than she could have imagined. Zach stood beside her, as he always had, his hand warm in hers. "What do you say we take a walk?" He suggested quietly, and she nodded. They slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand across the land they had made their own. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, painted gold by the setting sun. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. Closer to hand, the house they had built stood solid and welcoming, lights glowing in the windows. "You remember what you asked me once," Clara said. "Whether I was happy, I remember. You said beyond measure." "I still am," Clara said. "After 30 years, 3 children, more grandchildren than I can sometimes keep track of, and all the ups and downs life has thrown at us, I am still beyond measure happy." Zach stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Even after all these years, his eyes still made her heart skip. "You know what I am most proud of?" he asked. "Not the ranch, not the cattle, not even the chapel, though that will always be special. I am most proud that every morning I wake up next to the woman I love and I get to spend another day making her happy." "You do make me happy," Clara said softly. "You always have. From that very first day when you stopped at the well for water, you have been my blessing, Zach Olson. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a kiss that held 30 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had nearly set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "We should get back," Clara said. "Our guests will wonder where we have gone." "Let them wonder a little longer," Zach replied, pulling her close again. "I want to stay here just a bit more, holding my wife, grateful for every day we have had and every day still to come." So they stood together as darkness fell softly over the prairie. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that would echo through generations. The chapel Zach had built for Clara stood behind them, a testament to love that was willing to create sacred space, to build foundations, to promise forever and mean it. Years later, when Clara was 75 and Zach was 78, they still lived on the ranch, though now surrounded by great-grandchildren who ran through the house with the same energy their own children once had. The chapel had been renovated and expanded twice more, now serving a thriving community that had grown up around the original Olson land. One evening in early spring, after a particularly beautiful sunset, Clara and Zach sat on the porch swing Zach had installed years ago. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist, exactly as they had sat thousands of times before. "I have been thinking," Zach said quietly. "About what?" "About that promise I made you all those years ago, to build you a chapel." Clara smiled. "You kept that promise and then some. That chapel has blessed more people than we could count. But I was thinking, maybe we should make sure it lasts even after we are gone, really establish it proper-like. We could deed the land it sits on to the church, make sure there will always be a place of worship here." Clara considered this, then nodded slowly. "I like that idea. It would be a fitting legacy, would it not? The chapel you built out of love, continuing to serve others long after we are just memories." "You will never be just a memory to me," Zach said, kissing her hair. "Even when I am old and gray and forgetful, I will remember the day a beautiful girl with honey-colored hair changed my entire world." "We are already old and gray," Clara pointed out, laughing. "Speak for yourself." "I am distinguished." Their laughter mingled in the evening air, the easy companionship of people who had loved each other through all of life's seasons. Around them, the sounds of family echoed from inside the house, grandchildren arguing over a game, Thomas discussing cattle prices with his own son, Rose visiting from her mission work with stories of the people she served. This was the legacy they had built. Not just land and buildings, but family and faith and love that multiplied and spread like ripples in water. It had all started with a drifter looking for a place to rest, and a preacher's daughter longing for more. It had grown into something neither could have predicted but both treasured beyond measure. As Clara sat on that porch swing, Zach's heartbeat steady against her ear, she thought about all the moments that had led them here. The first glimpse across a dusty street, the conversations by the creek, the decision to choose love over fear, the building of a chapel that became a home, a community, a legacy. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For stopping in Red Bluff, for building me a chapel, for loving me enough to make all my dreams come true, and then giving me dreams I did not even know I had." Zach held her tighter. "Thank you for seeing past the dust and the drifting to the man I wanted to become. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for every day of these past 53 years. 53 years, Clara marveled. Where did the time go? Into living, Zach said simply. Into loving, into building something worth leaving behind. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear overhead, the same stars they had watched together for more than half a century. Inside, someone started playing the piano, and familiar hymn music drifted through the open windows. "They are singing," Clara noted. "They are happy," Zach replied, "just like us." And it was true. Despite all the hardships, all the challenges, all the uncertainties that life on the frontier had brought, happiness had been their constant companion. Not the easy kind that came from comfort and wealth, but the deep, abiding kind that came from purpose and partnership and faith. The chapel stood in the darkness, its cross visible against the starlit sky. Inside, the benches Zach had carved still held worshippers every Sunday. The altar still bore Clara's mother's Bible, now supplemented by others donated over the years. The walls still echoed with prayers and hymns and the whispered confessions of people seeking peace. It was exactly what Zach had promised to build all those years ago, and so much more. It was a symbol of their love, yes, but also of their commitment to something larger than themselves. It was proof that two people, starting with nothing but love and determination, could create something lasting and meaningful. As Clara and Zach Olson sat together on their porch that spring evening, surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had tamed, they knew they had lived a good life. Not a perfect one, but a real one, full of love and purpose and faith. The preacher's daughter, who had fallen for a drifting cowboy, had found everything she was looking for and more. The drifter, who had been searching for a place to belong, had found his home. Together, they had built not just a chapel, but a legacy that would endure for generations. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the prairie wind whispered through the grass, their love story continued, written in wood and stone, in children and grandchildren, in the sacred space of the chapel that stood as an eternal reminder of what was possible when two hearts chose each other and refused to let go.